Welcome to the Impactful Millionaire Show, your destination for insights, stories, and strategies to propel your business, finances, and life to the next level so you can experience more wealth, income, impact, and influence in our culture. Give it up for your host, Kingdom Millionaire Mentor, Ike Ikokwu.
Hello, everybody. Kingdom Millionaire Mentor Ike Ikokwu here with the Impactful Millionaire Show. And today I am interviewing Oz Hillman. Oz is the president of Marketplace Leaders. He's also the president of Aslan Group Publishing. And through both companies, Oz gets to impact and influence our culture as an author, a speaker, an executive coach, and as the publisher of the very popular TGIF newsletter. Oz, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hello, Ike. So good to be with you, buddy.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you could be here. So listen, Oz, why don't we kick off the show by having you share with us a little bit of what you're up to now, as well as maybe tell us what you're most excited about.
Well, Ike, I felt like I've gone through about a 7-year season where I was just very focused on equipping men and women in the marketplace through my half-day workshops and to do some online training. And so that, I had some travel in the middle of that. Of course, I got married 2.5 years ago, and that's also a very important focus to get really established there. So all of that kept me busy. But then in the beginning of the year, I felt led to do something I used to do for many years, every year for about 6 years, and that was host an international conference on the 7 cultural mountains. And so I met a couple of people that sort of became the catalyst to kind of encourage me to go ahead and step out and host a very important event, the biggest I've ever hosted, and with more speakers than we've ever hosted. It's called the International Culture Shapers Summit, and it'll be in Washington, D.C. next March, and we have over 45 presenters in that event based on the 7 cultural mountains of business, government, arts and entertainment, media, the family, the church, that these areas most define the culture that we live in. And so we're bringing together leaders like Roma Downey in arts and entertainment, Hugh Hewitt in the media, Tony Perkins for the family with Family Research Council, Del Tackett, who did the Truth Project that was so popular around culture change, and a number of other people. All the major workplace ministries are joining us for that. So if your listeners were interested in that, they can go to our website at cultureshaperssummit.com. cultureshaperssummit.com. It's going to be a great gathering. We're partnering with the Museum of the Bible, which is a $1 billion project that opened up a year ago in November, sponsored by the Green family with Hobby Lobby. I've already been there one time, and it's an extraordinary 6th floor, over 30,000 artifacts, and the latest technology. So your listeners will want to go just for that, if nothing else. They get access to the museum on Friday and Saturday afternoon.
There's a lot of talk out there about the 7 mountains. And even when you think about the summit you guys are putting on, in layman's terms, what is the 7 mountain movement all about? And what is the summit looking to do as it relates to that movement in itself?
Sure. This really came about in 1975. Bill Bright with Campus Crusade and Lauren Cunningham with Youth with a Mission both met each other for the very first time. And it just so happened that week God spoke to them and said, these are the 7 areas that most define the culture that we live in today. And people adopt their values and their beliefs from these areas. And so they said, God wants us to raise up young people to go into these areas. Now, I believe they attempted to do that, but unfortunately, they were trying to develop a strategy that was released through the church market, which I believe was not the way to do that. But it took the faith at work movement that really got birthed in the mid 90s, where men and women came and finally said, I realize I'm not here just to write a check for the local church, but I have a ministry myself. And I have a calling. I have a calling to impact culture. I have a calling to impact my workplace. And so as a result of that, I believe we got some momentum around the seven mountains, which is simply a strategy. It's not a theology. It's not dominionism. It's just a concept that we want to be salt and light in these strategic areas. And we have a case study that tells us that it only takes 3 to 5% of a leadership at the top of one of these cultural mountains to shift that mountain. And the best case study of that is the gay rights movement that actually used this strategy to change America's perspective of this issue from being a moral issue to being a civil issue. And they went into each one of these mountains and used a strategy to change America's view of this issue.
Wow. So for those that may be interested now in attending, reflecting on their time, I think it's in March of next year, right? Is that when it's?
That's right, March 28 to 31, 2019, Washington, D.C.
Okay. What would be 2 or 3 of the biggest takeaways people can expect coming out of actually attending the event?
Absolutely. Well, it'll be a place where you understand the signs of the times. Because we've got top leaders in each of these areas, they're able to give us a report on what's really going on out there and how much ground are we losing, how much ground are we taking, and the sons of Issachar understood the signs of the times. And so we want to be people that understand the signs of the times. Secondly, we want to hear from people who are doing things. We want to learn from the case studies we have a lot of 10-minute TED Talk type presenters who are doing things in each of these 7 areas. And so you'll be educated on practical models and be able to connect with those people who are doing it. We actually have an app that will be part of the event where you'll be able to connect with all the speakers right there on the app. It'll be an opportunity to collaborate with others. There'll be plenty of networking times to be able to meet some of these people and learn from them and connect with them and collaborate. We'll also be introducing a new technology called World Changer Network. This was a technology that was created originally for the United Nations for community development. It has been adopted by the guy who created it is a believer. And so he has joined World Changer Network to adopt this for kingdom purposes, to help people take a project, resource it financially, be able to connect with volunteers or team people, or if you want to hire somebody for your project. And it's a tremendous technology. We've been showing it off here lately. So that technology will help us form what we believe will be Clapham type groups out of the 7 mountains. William Wilberforce was part of about 18 other individuals back in England. They abolished slavery after 30 years of work, but they actually had 69 world-changing initiatives. And as a result of that, they were able to collaborate and really do things together that made a huge difference in the culture. So now that we have technology that can do this, we're going to form these Clapham type groups around the 7 mountains so people can meet each other and connect and be able to walk together and use their time, talent, and treasure to have greater impact.
Awesome. And how many days is the summit?
It's a Thursday night through Sunday at noon.
Okay. Are there any special promotions for people that would maybe encourage them to sign up now as opposed to later?
There absolutely is. Until February 1st, we're running a pre-registration discount of $300. So up until February 1st, you can get a discount of $300. And after that, it goes up $300. So now's the time to connect. And we also have an incredible hotel rate of $129 a night, which it's Cherry Blossom Week that week in DC. So all the hotels are full, and usually those hotels are $400 a night, and we got an incredible rate. So even if you're thinking about coming, you should at least reserve your hotel. And you can find that information on our website, cultureshaperssummit.com.
Awesome. Now, for the few who maybe scheduling conflicts preclude them from physically being present, will there be any other resources for people to be able to kind of tap into that moment as well?
We might be doing a live streaming, but we're not firm on that yet. But we can handle 500 people, and so our focus right now is to make sure that we fill that up. And then if we fill that up, then we'll consider other opportunities to connect.
I look at your life right now, and it's an amazing life that you're living. I mean, you're collaborating with the Museum of the Bible. You're headlining and hosting an international conference as an influencer in the Seven Mountains. And if you're not doing international events, you've hosted national and local events over the years. And what a lot of people might not be aware of, though, is that there was about a 7-year stretch years ago where things kind of shifted for you and almost led you to the
That's
brink.
An understatement.
I mean, you were almost at the brink of bankruptcy and really questioning what your life purpose and destiny call was. Can you share with us a little bit about what that was like back then?
Yeah, I had an ad agency for 12 years in Atlanta, and we were a nice small ad agency, but we had some really cherry picking type clients. We had American Express and Steinway pianos and what is Belk department store today, and some major carpet companies and some major Christian publishers like Thomas Nelson. So we were a good small ad agency. But in the spring of 1994, my wife walked in and said she wanted to separate. We'd had some challenges and we're in and out of counseling, but I didn't think it had gotten that serious for her to do that, but she did. But within 3 months, I would end up losing over $500,000 from a Bernie Madoff type of scam. And then my vice president would leave and take my second largest account, and then my largest account stuck us for $140,000 and fired us. And so life went from one place to a whole nother place within just a matter of 2 to 3 months. And it ushered me into a 7-year season of really trying to understand what had happened, because I was kind of at the top of my game. I could have probably retired if I wanted to. And so it was a difficult season because I was sharing the gospel with people. I was giving to Christian causes. I was leading Bible studies. I was doing all the right things. But so I didn't know what to make of this. And then 2 years into my adversity, a guy named Gunnar Olson, who's the founder of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce, shared with me that as he heard my story, he said, "Os, you have a Joseph calling. It's a calling that's a marketplace call to be a spiritual and physical provider to others, but it's through the earmark of adversity. And God will use this, to give you authority that you didn't have before and to be a blessing to other people by what he deposits in your life through that season." And so everything he said came true that day. He actually drew a diagram on a napkin and said, "Here's where you are, here's where you'll go next, and here's the next step. The key is pressing into Jesus with all your heart." And so I did that, and he became my spiritual father from that day forward. I just talked to him last week. We're still connected after 20 years. And interestingly, that it was in those 7 years that I started writing. And one of the things that came out of that was a devotional called TGIF, Today God is First, instead of Thank God It's Friday. And as a result of starting to write that, it started circulating. A good friend of mine who had an internet site, which is called crosswalk.com today, said, let me put it on our website and we'll send it off for you. I was sending it off a little black and white Apple computer back then. And so when he started doing that, people started reading it all over the world. And I started getting letters, and they would always say one thing: "You read my mail today. You spoke right into what I'm going through." And so what I realized is that I wrote those while I was in my pit experience, as I call it. And evidently, a lot of people go through their own pit because they were resonating with what I was sharing. And because they were very short, 300 to 400 words, people would read them and they would share them with other people. And so today it's read in 104 countries, and it's subscribed to by about 150,000. And we know people pass it along, so it could be 4 or 5 times that in readership. But they all say the same thing, though: "You read my mail today." And that kind of started things going. And ultimately, I would end up going to 26 countries, equipping leaders, and just finished my 18th book. And so God birthed, from the valley of Achor. It talks about in Hosea 2:15, that word Achor means trouble, a door of hope for me, a door of hope for others. And so it became a whole new calling for me. I never would imagine that I could make a living doing what I'm doing. And but God has blessed it. And so you just never know how God's going to use a major adversity in your life. And one of the books I wrote was called The Joseph Calling, and I talk about 6 stages that people go through in the Joseph Calling. And the first stage is usually the recruitment stage, that there's usually some type of major crisis that ushers a Joseph into his journey. And I know you can relate to that.
Absolutely, I can. One of the things that I think is really significant about your story is how God weaves in the right individuals to provide clarity and mentorship for the road ahead. Because if you've never been down a path that you're headed, it's always good to have somebody who's been down that path who can show you. And I believe Gunnar was the person for you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I walked into the room that day to meet Gunnar as a defeated Christian businessman. I walked out realizing there was a call of God on my life, and that there was a process that someone knew existed that was clearly defined in the Bible, and through a leader who knew of this process for many years.
Mm-hmm. The beauty of mentorship, as I see it, is, Warren Buffett says that we all learn from our mistakes, but all the mistakes we learn from don't have to be the ones that we make. And so there's this false sense of security that says that when you work with a mentor, because they've already been down the path that you're headed, that you're somehow going to avoid all of the pain that's associated with adversity. But even with Gunnar by your side, there were still incredible measures of adversity that you had to deal with, that you now refer to as sort of having an upside. I think you even have a book about that, The Upside of Adversity.
Yeah, in fact, Gunnar and I were together in 1998, 2 years after I'd met him, and he had invited me to come to a conference on the island of Cyprus. And I didn't have any money at the time, and but literally the next day, someone had called me and said, did I know about this conference that was going to be on the island of Cyprus? And I said, well, as of yesterday, I do. And they said, would you ride to the airport with me? And I said, okay. And he says, we're going to pick up a man named Dave. He's flying in from Cyprus. Did you know there's a conference on Cyprus? And Gunnar Olsen is hosting it. We thought it'd be great if we could take you along and have you teach your workshop to some key leaders, and we'll pay your way and an honorarium for you. What do you think? And I said, well, I'll have to pray about that, right? So God provided for me to go there. And when I got there, after I led a devotional one day, I didn't say anything about my life. And I just lost that, 500,000 and more within the last 2 years. And so a man comes up to me from England and he says, God wants you to know he had to remove your finances in order to reserve the reward he has for you in heaven. And I thought, whoa, he didn't know a thing about me. And then when I got on the plane to go back, to the States, we had to fly to Germany first. And it just so happened Gunnar was on that plane and a seat opened up next to me and he was able to sit next to me for the whole flight, which is very unusual. And so he turned to me and he said, Loss, when I think of your life, I think of you like a butterfly. A butterfly, in order to gain strength, it has to come out of the cocoon, and you have to let it do that by itself. If you cut him out of it, he will not be strong enough to survive. It's the very struggle out of that cocoon that allows him to fulfill his destiny. And he says, in many ways, I see you as a butterfly. I had the ability to cut you out of the cocoon financially anytime I wanted to, but God wouldn't let me. He said that if I did that, it would not be good for you, that you had to work through this yourself and had to discover the things that he wanted you to discover through this difficult journey. And he says it was difficult watching you go through it, but I knew that was what I had to do. It's interesting, I never have received one penny from Gunnar to our ministry or anything. And it's always been just more of a father relationship, if you will.
Wow, that's incredible. So obviously he was a major role in helping you gain clarity about the path that you were on, which led you to identify these 6 stages. So for those, and I know you're about to talk about that first stage, you said the recruitment phase, which is often birthed through crisis. That's always a fun time for people's lives. So for those who may have had their life upended and are experiencing some level of crisis, could be in business, could be through some investments they made, could be through marriage, how do they not reflect upon that crisis as sort of a consequence for bad decisions, as an example, as opposed to, hey, God is really calling you to your larger story in life?
Well, I think it's important for us to evaluate that, because we can end up in the pit because of our own wrong decisions, and that's a reality. But the truth is, though, that even if that is a reality, God always gives us a second chance, and I often say that, only Jesus made plan A. For the rest of us, he turns our B plan and C plan into his A plan. And so in my particular case, I felt like there were some generational strongholds that contributed to some of the decisions I had made that got me in my pit. Okay. And I didn't understand them. They weren't evident to me, but I discovered them as God brought another mentor in my life during that season and helped me to be able to see those things. And he brought a very difficult guy in my life. He was like a drill sergeant, if you will, in the kingdom. And he could recognize my sin a mile away, and he'd say, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just not dead yet." And as soon as you die, God's going to turn things around for you. And that was true. I had some old stuff in me that was still operating, that I was striving, and I couldn't move past that. But fortunately, I had a guy like that who was around me, that God sent him in my life actually before Gunnar, and so interesting how God does that. But these clearly, when I wrote the Joseph Calling and also the Upside of Adversity, in both of those books, I talk about the 6 stages that I find in every Joseph, and every major leader in the Bible went through these 6 stages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the recruitment stage is sort of the introduction to that. And it sounds like part of what I'm hearing from you is, mentors play a critical role. I mean, you had Gunnar, and it's like he had a very specific purpose in your life, had the resources and the wherewithal to pull you out of the pit. And God's like, nope, he needs to go through this to learn what he needs to learn. Then he brings this other gentleman who's got a different personality type, but it's exactly what you need to kind of see, what's in your blind spot. And that helps you kind of process being in that recruitment stage, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So this, do you want to review the 6 stages?
Let's kind of go through that a little bit.
Well, the second stage is character development. So we get ushered in through a crisis, and during that crisis period, there is the character development. Like David, David was ushered into his process through the encounter with Goliath. But then he became so successful in what he did that it made his king, Saul, jealous of him. And Saul tried to kill him. That isn't that interesting? You do your job so well that you make people hate you. But anyway, so he goes through several years of being, a fugitive, if you will, and not because he deserved it, but because the enemy was trying to kill him. But it was through that time that he developed character, and God used that in his life. And he also went to the third stage, which is isolation. He ended up going into the cave of Adullam and had to stay there to actually avoid his by this time it was his son who was trying to kill him. And then the next stage is...
Let me stop you there, because that isolation stage, I think, is really, really key, because I know, just even looking at justice, I know most prisoners would rather face the death penalty than get be put in solitary confinement. That's just how depressing that is. So, I'm trying to look at that from the standpoint of somebody who's now walking through some of these stages. How do you survive the isolation stage without losing your mind? And again, feeling like maybe you're being penalized for something that you've done.
Well, actually, the isolation stage is a very important stage, because I often say that he turns messes into messages and messengers. When you look at many of the major leaders in the Bible, and even modern day leaders, you find that when they were isolated, God gave them a download. If you look at the Apostle Paul, he spent a lot of time in jails. He wrote a lot of the epistles in jail. You look at the Apostle John on the island of Patmos, he got the download of Revelation and wrote the book of Revelation during an extreme period of isolation. You look at the author of Pilgrim's Progress, he was in prison for 12 years, and that's where he wrote Pilgrim's Progress. Or how about the President Nelson Mandela? He was 27 years in prison, and right after getting out of prison, he's elevated to the presidency. So there's a clear pattern. Jeremiah, Isaiah, many of them were isolated during their times, and God deposited something in them during those isolation periods. So we need to embrace those times and look to see what God might be depositing in us through that.
Yeah, during your time, what did you find that he deposited and released through you during your time of isolation?
Well, I think the devotional was the first thing.
Okay.
And I would end up writing a lot more as a result of being isolated, where my wife had left me. I was alone, and I was in transition with my business life, and so I had a lot of time on my hands. And so he really deposited a lot of things in me that I now share with many people. So that's often what it is. We get it ourselves, and then he gives us the authority to release that to other people. and it really becomes our authority to minister and help others become free of the things that have hindered them.
That's definitely the upside to the isolation phase. What's the next stage that you typically run into after that?
The next stage is often the cross phase, and the cross phase is where I found that most of the leaders that God used significantly had some type of betrayal in their life. You know, David had several betrayals. Joseph had his brothers betray him. Jesus had Judas betray him. And so you look at all these people, and they had somebody betray them. And Jesus said, if you want to be great in the kingdom, then you must be servant of all. But you've also got to love your enemies and wash the feet of your Judas. And so that becomes a real difficult one. I
Yeah.
often say that even if you're the most spiritual Christian, you can only put 2 nails in your own cross. And so God helps you by raising up somebody to betray you, see if you're willing to do that. And it's God's graduate level test, if you will. And so
Betrayal is actually pretty interesting because, I think the common places where we see that, like you said, is typically in marriages or with business or with investment deals that you may have gotten into. What might be some not so obvious places where it could show up in the life of a believer that God may be shining his light on as well that he wants him or her to pay attention to?
well, I think that certainly in relationships, marital relationships, we can run into problems like that, and especially that ones that lead to divorce. Then you've got a breach in that relationship. My wife tells an incredible story for herself of where she and I have just been married 2.5 years, and I met her at a movie preview called Captive, which was about a drug addict who her life was almost taken by someone who took her in North Atlanta and threatened to kill her. But she read The Purpose-Driven Life to this guy, and she believes that saved her life. But anyway, she was into drugs. So my wife had been into drugs because of being raised sexually abused from the age of 5 into her adult life, and she had the threat of death if she told anybody about those that were abusing her. And so to deal with that, she would take drugs, and she became a 35-year cocaine addict, and also a prostitute, as well as just being in some very difficult situations with the mafia. I mean, we believe there's going to be a movie about her life because it was such a redemptive story, because she ended up going to prison for 18 months, and God really worked in her life, and she started the prison ministry, and that's what she does today for 8 years. But anyway, she had a situation where a man wanted to be with her that she refused him, and he says, I'm going to have you one day. And so anyway, she was invited over to a dinner party one night, and this man had a drug put in her drink, and it knocked her out. And 7 men came and abused her and raped her, and she woke up in a puddle. And the witness who was there told her about what happened, and she was going to take a contract out on this guy's life. But she went to prison not long after that, and it was during that prison time that God dealt with her about forgiveness, even this situation. And so it was very, very difficult for her to forgive. But God showed her in a dream that this man was sexually abused as a child, and that gave her the empathy to forgive this man. And just so happens that right after she got out of prison, she ran into this man in a public place. And he says, I've been searching for you. I needed to talk to you. And he says, I have become a Christian. and I need to ask your forgiveness for what I did to you. And Pamela and we often say, I wonder if the catalyst for that was your forgiveness of him and praying for him that allowed him to do that. And so that's the most powerful forgiveness story that I know is from my own wife.
That's incredible. I mean, as I'm learning that there are different depths to forgiveness, and to me, the crescendos where you can see the individual who betrayed you and from your heart of hearts have no ill feelings whatsoever. That's because the veil's been removed and you've prayed and you've interceded for that individual that they may see the glory of Christ manifested in their life. And as singular as a statement as that sounds, the amount of work that has to take place in the background to get to that point is tremendous. So certainly applaud Pamela for, what she did to get her to that point of real deep forgiveness.
Yeah, she's an inspiration to many. And if your listeners want to hear her full story, they can go to lifechangerslegacy.com, lifechangerslegacy.com, and it'll bless you to hear her story.
Absolutely. So let's assume you make it past these first 4 stages in your big call to your destiny. What shows up next on your journey?
The next part is more the fruitful side of your calling, and that is you become a problem solver. Joseph was a problem solver. David was a problem solver. Jesus was a problem solver. The disciples were problem solvers. So every entrepreneur needs to be a problem solver. That's why we're in business. Business needs to solve a problem. But what you see in the life of Jesus is every time he met somebody, he usually solved some type of problem. We met Peter, he solved his fishing problem. When he had a tax problem, he told him how to solve that problem. The woman at the well had a problem he solved. The woman who was going to be stoned for prostitution had a problem that Jesus solved. Lazarus had a problem. And so every time he solved the problem, his influence grew.
Yeah.
So influence comes as a result of being problem solvers in a life or a community or a business. And so that's a simple process. And so you can look to receive the fruit of greater influence when you become a problem solver. And then,
so I was going to ask you, at that stage, do you feel like it's always going to be you solving a new problem? I think about Amazon in terms of how they've changed commerce and how we shop. That's kind of like solving a new problem. Mm-hmm. Or like an Elon Musk who, looks at an existing problem with electric cars and says this could be bigger, better, more efficient. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a central thing. If you just think about any type of organization or service or ministry, what problem are they solving? And in business, you often see on television, especially late night television, you see this product for $19.95, right? And what does it do? It solves a problem. And the more powerful demonstration of the problem it solves, the more products they're going to sell. So it's transferable in business and life.
Yeah, that's sage advice right there. So if you're listening and you're watching this broadcast and you feel like you've got a dream, you're looking to become an entrepreneur, you've got an idea that you're kind of stewarding, ask yourself, and John Maxwell has a book that kind of helps with this. It's called Put Your Dream to the Test. So rather than just launch what you think is a good idea, ask yourself, 1, which demographic is this business idea going to address? And 2, what problem is it actually solving? And once you can identify both of those 2 things, you can be well on the way to realizing that perhaps this wasn't just a bad case of having too much chocolate one night and getting an idea that you think may fly, but something that could actually be transformative, because we are in business to solve people's problems. And so if you're not solving a problem, you might just have a hobby.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the final stage is networks. God evidently is into networks, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Jesus, and the 12. Daniel had his three friends. Um, my favorite case study for networks is William Wilberforce, who had about 18 other individuals that he walked with in England. And their core thing that they used their time, talent, and treasure to solve was the issue of slavery. After 30 years of work, they solved that problem. And so that's an important concept that Jesus talks about in John 17:21 through 23, that he prayed that we would be one as the Father and he are one, that they might believe in me. And in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, he talks about two are better than one. And so when we collaborate, we're able to really leverage our resources and our time and talent. And so uh, think about, networking with others to accomplish a greater, project or, greater effect with than but just by yourself.
I know you're going to appreciate this question about networking because I know that your core personality is one of an introvert. But when I see you out, either speaking or hosting events, nobody could guess that that's your fallback position. So for those who realize that they have to get through these 6 phases and they look at that network phase and go, that's scary because I'm not comfortable in environments with a bunch of people. Maybe I don't like public speaking. I don't have that, charisma, whatever it is that they have as lies that are preventing them from being able to step through that stage. What can you say to try to help encourage them get past that stage?
Well, I think we need to realize one of the kingdom values is that God works through weakness. I barely got out of English class in high school. I was a lousy student. My grammar was
And you've written
lousy.
how many books? How many books have you written?
18 books.
Wow.
I also have been a lot even more introverted than I am today. I was extremely introverted growing up. And if you had me to stand in front of people, I'd get so nervous I could almost not talk. But that's where God does the deeper work in our lives, and we have to step into things. We can't step into things based on our perceived weakness, but we step into things based on what we believe God's doing in us and through us and wants to do. The first meeting that I had Gunnar speak at a meeting that I had in Atlanta, this was a year after I'd met him. And I had convened a group of leaders, about 70 workplace leaders of workplace ministries and so forth. And he was part of that. And we had breakfast the next day. And I was in the middle of some very challenging relationships. I was in the middle of the divorce. I had somebody else that was suing me. And I had all these things going on. And I was talking to Gunnar about that, and he said, well, you need to understand that Satan always attacks you in the place of your inheritance. He says, your inheritance is in relationships. I've tried to convene a group of leaders like this for years and have not been able to do it. You did it literally by accident, and it's just an anointing that you have. But you need to realize that Satan's going to attack that anointing. And so you're going to have relationship challenges. You're going to be attacked in the area of relationships. If you've called to create wealth, you know where you got attacked, you got attacked in the area of money.
That's right.
And that's what Satan does. He attacks you in the very place of your inheritance. And so we don't need to shy away from things that we're not good at, or not, it doesn't come natural to us, but we need to embrace And if it means learning how to do something, I've learned to be a public speaker. I've learned to write, and I've gotten better at it, and so I get a lot of compliments on both of those things, but it wasn't always that way.
One of the areas that I see entrepreneurs struggle a lot with the whole notion of networking is just a core communication skill, which is telling what it is that you do. When you've heard people talk about elevator talks for many years, and what I've come to find out is if you tap into the whole reason why your business exists, you've identified what the problem is, and you're armed with what the solution, then one of the tools that you can use to help bridge the gap in communication is to not simply say, I'm a coach, I'm a CPA, but to build a story around a problem that your audience is dealing with and the solution that you provide. Because we all remember stories a whole lot better, and it helps kind of separate you from the next coach or CPA, whatever the case may be. What are the tools have you found in this stage that has kind of helped you be better prepared to really take advantage of the opportunities that come from expanding your network?
Well, I've always been a person who likes to learn and is willing to invest in that. I'll never forget a close friend of mine said, when I would invite him to go to a conference with me or tell him to come to this conference or my conference or whatever, he says, why would I want to go to another conference? And I said, to learn. And so, I would go out of the country to meet Gunnar Olsen just to be able to spend an hour with him. And that usually was all I could get because he was such a person in demand at these international events. But we always scheduled time after the event where we sat down and had coffee. And I got more from that time that I could live off of for the next 6 months, because he was making a deposit. He was giving me something to work on. And he would always pose something to me. He says, now think about that and come back to me. And so he was a unique mentor that knew how to kind of guide me in the place that I was and to encourage me.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is an additional tool is to be comfortable with making an investment in yourself.
Yeah, investment in yourself, investment in books, investment in people that have done well. I had, when I started doing more online training, I invested in a group that I saw would help me do that better. And so I had to learn the technical aspect of that. And I had to invest in technology platform to make our training available online. So it's a constant process of learning, investing, and growing.
Sure.
If we don't, we end up waking up and becoming the Polaroid camera, right? Yeah.
Being left in the dust, as they say. Now, I know your journey through your Joseph calling process took 7 years. As you've studied this, looking at models in scripture and models in business of people who've had to succumb and surrender to this higher call on their life, have you? And we know there's some significance behind the number 7, right? It's the state of completion of things. Do you feel like it always has to take 7 years, or can it be less, or can it be more? What are your thoughts about that?
It's amazing how many people I have run into who have this Joseph calling on their life, that it's been 7 years for them, their process. I think that God leaves us in a state of process for a number of years in order to create a nature change in our life versus just a habit change. Mm-hmm. If we step into our pit and we're only there 6 months, chances are we haven't really changed any nature in how we're doing things. And we haven't learned the key things that God wants to teach us through that experience. So the one thing that I have learned, and I noticed with people who are in their pit, they'll often say, when will I know I'm coming out of my pit? When am I going, you know, how, how long is it going to be? And I say, well, it's usually when you have come to a place where it doesn't matter anymore, God starts to work. You basically become dead to the issue. And it's not because it's not important to you or you don't care, but you've come to a place of acceptance of the purposes of God in your life and the processes that God is taking you through. And then when you start embracing that, it's just amazing how things start to change. And you'll know you're coming out of it because things will start happening without you doing anything. You'll have people come to you. You'll have resources come to you. You'll have situations that before were a roadblock, and now all of a sudden they're opening up to you.
That's excellent. So for those of you out there that may be experiencing this and you're asking yourself the question, am I doing anything to prolong the timeline of getting to the finish line of my Joseph calling? Just remember that you need to trust the process, right? And once you get to the point where the very question that you have no longer becomes a question, that's a light bulb moment that you're getting closer to the end. Because the whole process about having a goal of getting past your Joseph call, going through your pit, it's not so much the end result as it is who you become in the process of getting there.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Yeah, definitely excellent feedback there. You know, one of the things that I think gets tossed around a lot is the whole idea of, well, you say you're a Christian entrepreneur, you own a kingdom business. What's the difference between your kingdom business or your Christian business versus just a regular entrepreneur? What would your response to that be?
Well, I was actually asked that question years ago when I was interviewed by the New York Times for an article they were doing in their Sunday paper about Christians in the workplace. And they asked me the question, what do you think makes a Christian in the workplace? What makes them different than a non-Christian?
Yeah.
And so as I thought about that, I felt like God showed me 4 key things. One is integrity, one is excellence, that we're to do our work with excellence. Daniel said in Daniel chapter 1 that Daniel and his 3 friends did their work 10 times better than anybody else. You know, many of us will be disqualified. It's kind of like a baseball diamond. There's 4 things to this that I see. But in order to get to first base, you need to do your work with excellence, because people won't do business with people who don't do their work well.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to do that work with excellence. Number 2 is integrity. And David in Psalm 51 said, God desires truth in the inward parts. And so integrity is that you are the same person in public as you are behind closed doors. Are you true from the inside out? And David, that psalm is written as repentance for a sin that he was involved in with Bathsheba. He would ultimately lose a child over that. And so number 3 is servanthood, being a servant of all. Jesus said, if you want to be great among them, then you must be servant of all. And it was the servants who saw the water turned into wine. It wasn't the people at the wedding, it was the servants. So when we're serving, we have the opportunity to see the power of God. And then number 4 is miracles. In Acts chapter 5, it says the apostles performed many miraculous signs in the public colonnade where the people could see them. And this is a big distinguishing mark between believers and non-believers. Even some non-believers can do 1, 2, and 3. I know some non-believers that do it better than Christians for 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
But number 4 really sets you apart. And so that's where we need to ask the question, are we exhibiting the life of God in our business? Are we seeing miracles in our business? Are we getting witty ideas,
Mm.
strategy from God to do our business? Is he first? Proverbs says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he shall direct thy path. So that's a core verse. And then I would encourage your listeners to read Psalm 15. I call that the marketplace psalm. And it talks about integrity in business in that psalm. Meditate on that psalm. See if you are living your life based on that psalm.
Hmm.
So Jesus never took anybody to the synagogue to get healed. He operated in the marketplace. And you and I operate in the marketplace. So that's where we have to really walk with God there and see his activity in our lives there.
Yeah, that fourth one is really an explosive topic, I think, because even within the believing church, there are those who've drawn this line of demarcation that says that miracles were a thing of the past, and they don't operate today. So I think for certain people, it's even a bigger stretch of faith to go, well, not only are we talking about miracles in the traditional Christian sense, but you're talking about miracles in the marketplace. So for those that might have a heart for that, what are some things that they can do to cultivate, prepare the environment to be a recipient of that? And maybe what are some areas that you feel like is sort of ripe for the Lord to invade in the marketplace to really display his glory?
Well, I think it's learning from other people, hearing how God does it in and through people. My book, Change Agent, engaging your passion to be the one who makes a difference, has a lot of case studies of people who are experiencing that and gives you some foundational understandings of how to walk with God in your business life. You can find that on our bookstore at tgifbookstore.com. Another book I would recommend people read is Gunnar Olsson's personal biography. That is on our bookstore as well. And it is called, gosh, I just went blank on the name of the book. If you just search Gunnar Olsson, Business Unlimited, that's the name of it, Business Unlimited by Gunnar Olsson, on our bookstore at tgifbookstore.com. It's a fantastic read, and he is truly an apostle in the marketplace.
Mm.
And with signs and wonders. And he shares a lot of those stories in his book.
It's great. So as we come to our last question here, you may be aware that Kobe Bryant won an Oscar for an animated short film he did called Dear Basketball. It was sort of a letter he wrote to his younger self. Michelle Obama has released a new book called Becoming, and I understand it's shattered the record as sort of the best-selling book of the year. But on her tour, I believe she's also doing something similar where she's sharing a letter that she wrote to her playful self. And I got to catch a little bit of that where she talked about, oh, by the way, you get to meet a pretty handsome guy after it's all said and done. So as you think back to your entrepreneurial journey, you think about all the years of wisdom that you've accumulated since you first started. If you were to write a letter to your younger self, what would be 3 things that you'd want to impart to that younger self today?
I think that I would impart the value that you have and your identity, because I think one thing that hinders almost all of us is that we get, growing up, the wrong identity given to us. I had something happen to me when I was about 14, 15 years old. And I was a very good young junior golfer growing up. My dad started me playing golf when I was 11 years old. By the time I was 14, I had had 3 hole-in-ones, and I'd broken 70 many times already. I had won my junior tournament, ended up playing in the U.S. Junior Amateur at 15 years old in Boston, Massachusetts. I knew early I wanted to play golf for a living. But one day I was playing in my high school championship, and I absolutely choked. I mean, I just blew it, and I just had gotten nervous, and I came home just despondent.
Mm.
And I shared it with my mother, and she didn't know what to do with me. But I know now what she should have done with me. She should have said, Oz, that's a normal process of learning to play golf and competitive golf. Doesn't make you a bad person. Doesn't mean that you're going to do that every time you play. It's just a learning process. So you need to learn from that, but don't take it personally, and don't put yourself under a performance trip.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I did all those things I shouldn't have done. I put myself on a performance trip, and I lived my life based on my performance, which got me uptight, and I was not able to achieve all that I knew I had the ability to do. And so I think words matter. With our young people, especially, words of affirmation are extremely important. When a young child does something good, affirm it. Because every time you criticize, somebody says it takes, 7 or 20 times to knock that one out, with the positive ones. So affirming that. I find that in my wife too. She needs words of affirmation. The scripture says, as a man thinketh, so is he. So if you're thinking thoughts that you don't measure up, or you're not good enough to do that, or you don't have the ability, all those negative thoughts, you might end up doing that because you're thinking that way.
So true. So true. Well, that's awesome advice, Oz. I really appreciate you being gracious with your time today and sharing tons and tons of wisdom. I know our listeners have gotten a lot of value from our time here today. For those that have been inspired by your words, your story, and are looking for additional resources, what's the best way for them to follow you, get more advice, get more access to you?
I think probably starting with reading our daily devotional at todaygodisfirst.com. Todaygodisfirst.com. We have 4 devotionals there. They can read them online, or they can subscribe and get the email. And that's a great way to start with us. Those who want to really go deeper in the things that we're talking about, we have an online training called becomeachangeagent.com. becomeachangeagent.com. We have over 37 courses, over 250 leader interviews. We have 50 case studies. It's a great place if you're a person who wants to learn.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, folks, it's been a great show today. Kingdom Millionaire Mentor Ike Ikokwu here. We are signing off for the day, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next episode. Take care, and God bless.
Thank you, Ike.
Thanks, Oz.
Show's over, but your learning is not. Head over to www.ikefreemasterclass.com to grab your free training on how I busted the 9 myths of how to win the money game and stack the deck so in my favor that I became a millionaire in just 5 years after filing bankruptcy. And how you can too.